We're going to talk about circumference of a circle, which is really similar to what we call perimeter for other shapes. So there are videos on perimeter if you haven't seen those, but when we're talking about a circle, instead of calling it perimeter, we're calling it circumference. And all it really means is the measurement of the distance around a circle. So for example, it's if you were going to put a fence up around something circular, how much fence would you need to go around that circle? That's what circumference is. Same idea as perimeter. It's just what's the length around the circle, and we call that circumference. So there's two ideas that you need to be familiar with in order to do circumference problems, and that is radius and diameter. And so if you don't know what radius and diameter are, you need to watch the Circles Part 1 video that's on the Facebook page. Because if you look on your formula sheet, they give you the formula for circumference. It's under the perimeter section, and it says circumference, which is C, equals 2 times pi times r, or C equals pi times d. And in these formulas, r means radius, d means diameter. Again, if you don't know what those mean, you need to watch the video on the Facebook page. So the thing that you might not have been exposed to is this symbol called pi. You write it, pi is pi, like that. They give you that it equals 3.14. So this symbol is just, it represents a constant. It represents this number. It's actually, can also be represented as a fraction, 22/7. And if you multiply that out, you'll see you get a huge, long, infinite number, but they round it to 3.14. So in the GED test, you can just use 3.14. So anytime you see this pi symbol, you can just substitute 3.14. So this really means C equals 2 times 3.14 times the radius, or circumference equals 3.14 times the diameter. We're just substituting 3.14 in for the pi symbol. People generally just use pi because, again, it is this huge long number, but it can be rounded to 3.14. So rather than saying 3.14, you just say pi. So this might seem strange at first that there are two formulas for circumference, but if you remember the relationship between radius and diameter, the diameter is the full length across the middle of a circle. The radius is half that length. So the radius is half of the diameter. So these two formulas are actually the same because 2 times the radius is the same thing as the diameter. If the diameter of a circle is 10, the radius is half of that, so the radius is 5. So 2 times 5 gives you the diameter. So 2 times the radius is really the same thing as the diameter. So it doesn't matter which formula you use, you just need to understand the relationship between radius and diameter. So we're going to do a few examples here. So the first thing we'll do is just kind of straightforward questions. So if I tell you the diameter, d, is 7, what is the circumference? I'm going to abbreviate circumference as C in the future, so I don't have to write that out all the time. So if the diameter is 7, what's the circumference? Well, circumference equals pi times diameter. When these two are written beside each other, that means multiplication. So you need to get your calculator out. Remember, pi is just 3.14, so that's 3.14 times the diameter times 7. You plug that into your calculator, and you get 21.98. If I give you the radius instead of the diameter, radius equals 10. Circumference is, so what's the circumference? 2 times pi, remember pi is just 3.14, times the radius. times 10. You plug that into your calculator. 2 times 3.14 times 10, you get 62.8. So those are pretty straightforward questions. You just, if they give you the diameter, you plug that in for D. If they give you the radius, you plug that in for R. Now what if they work a little bit backwards, where they say the circumference equals 12.56, and these are all going to have units, so let's say millimeters. What is the diameter of the circle, which is D? So now we have a little bit of an algebra problem. So they're giving us the circumference, and we're trying to find the diameter. So we have 12.56 equals pi times diameter. This is the same as, remember, pi is 3.14 times the diameter. How do we get D by itself? We're trying to find D. You can watch videos on algebra, basic algebra problems, but in order to find this, to get D by itself, this is a multiplication, so we're going to divide. So we're going to divide each side by 3.14. This cancels out, so we have 12.56 divided by 3.14. You plug that into your calculator, and you get 4 equals D, or D equals 4, since you can flip them around. So the diameter is 4. So if they give you the circumference asking for the diameter, you just put the numbers in the formula. Circumference, C equals 12.56 equals pi times diameter. You write it out, put the numbers in for pi, and then this is an algebra problem, which again, if you don't know how to do that, watch the videos on Facebook regarding algebra. But since this is a multiplication, to get rid of the 3.14 and get D by itself, you just divide. What times 3.14 is going to give you this? You just divide this by this. So 12.56 divided by 3.14 is 4. That's what your diameter is. What if they say the circumference is 18.84 meters? What is the radius? So again, we have the formula. C, 18.84 equals 2 times pi. We're going to put 3.14 in there, times r, because we're looking for the radius, so we're going to use this formula. 18.84 equals 2 times 3.14 times r. So we can do, what's 2 times 3.14? 6.28 times r. We need to get r by itself, so we can solve for that. We just divide 18.84 divided by 6.28. That cancels. 18.84 divided by 6.28 is 3. So the radius would equal 3. One thing that they might do, just to kind of throw you off, is leave things in terms of pi. So I want to show you just a problem like that. You might say the circumference is 6 pi. What is the diameter? So here again, we just plug it in. 6 pi equals pi times diameter. Now, you can actually multiply all this out and you'll get the right answer. You can put 3.14 in for this. But if you look at this, this is actually a pretty easy problem to solve, because you have 6 pi equals what times pi? Well, it has to be 6. So the other thing you can do is divide by pi, just like we do any other algebra problem. 6 pi divided by pi equals pi divided by pi. This cancels out, these cancel out, 6 equals the diameter. But if you just look at it, it should make sense to you that 6 times pi is the same thing as pi times what? Well, it has to be 6. Similarly, if they tell you, let's say, circumference equals 14 pi, what is the radius? Again, we have 14 pi equals 2 times pi times the radius. So here you can probably reason this out as well. So 14 times pi equals 2 times pi times what? So 2 times what has to equal 14. So you can intuitively probably figure this out to be 7. But if you want to do it algebraically, you can get rid of the 2 by dividing by 2. These cancel out. And you have 14 divided by 2. So now we have 7 pi equals pi times radius. So 7 times pi equals pi times what? Well, it has to be 7. So you can hopefully see that intuitively. Otherwise, you can divide each side by pi. They cancel out, and you get 7 equals the radius. So don't get thrown off if they leave things in terms of pi. This is just a constant number. So you can still, these are almost easier problems where you can just look at them and see what has to be multiplied by that pi to get the answer. The other thing is that they're probably not going to give you straightforward questions. They may put them in form of word problems, which you just need to be able to recognize from a word problem when you have to do circumference problems. So let's say they say a rod is bent. No, let's say a rod that is 10.38 feet is bent to form a circle. What is the radius of that circle? So you have a rod that measures 10.38 feet. They're going to bend it so that it's now in the form of a circle. What's the radius of that circle? So here you need to recognize that, again, around the length around the circle is circumference. So if you're taking something that's 10.38 feet and making it into a circle, the distance around that circle is 10.38. That is the circumference of this circle. So we know the circumference is 10.38. So what's the radius is the question. And so this is back to a problem like we just did. So C equals 2 pi r. C is 10.38 equals 2 times pi times r. So 10.38, you plug in 3.14, and for pi, you get your calculator out. 10.38 equals 6.2 times 3.14 is 6.28 times r. You divide each side by 6.28 in order to get the radius. So 10.38 divided by 6.28 is 1.65 equals the radius. So that's how you would do that problem. Let's do one more kind of word problem. So Tim measures a truck tire mark for one complete revolution as 100.48 inches long. What is the diameter of the tire? So here we have a tire truck mark. He's saying is 100.48 inches. So this is on the ground. So they want to know what's the diameter of the tire. So if after one revolution, so if a tire goes across one revolution, that means that that is the circumference of that tire. So they're asking you what is the diameter now of the tire if this is the circumference. So again, we have circumference equals 100.48. What's the diameter? So again, we just use our formula. 100.48 equals pi times the diameter. 100.48 equals, put 3.14 in for pi, divide each side by 3.14 in order to solve for d. 100.48 divided by 3.14 is 32. That's the diameter. So don't get scared off if you see word problems. Think about what they're asking you and know that what circumference is the length around a circle. And so this is the formula that you would have to apply.